The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the empty concert hall as Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart down the side aisle. It was nearly midnight on a Thursday in March 2019, and the prestigious Steinway Hall in Manhattan had just hosted another sold-out performance by a renowned classical pianist. The audience had long since departed, leaving behind the usual debris of crumpled programs, forgotten scarves, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume mixed with floor polish. Marcus had been working as a janitor at Steinway Hall for almost 3 years. At 42 years old, he had become invisible to most people who passed through these hallowed doors. The concert staff barely acknowledged him beyond a polite nod. The musicians treated him like part of the furniture. The wealthy patrons in their elegant evening wear looked right through him as though he existed in a different dimension entirely. He had grown accustomed to this invisibility, even found a strange comfort in it. It allowed him to move through the building unnoticed, to observe the world of classical music from the shadows while harboring a secret that weighed heavily on his heart. What nobody knew about Marcus was that he had once dreamed of standing on that very stage himself. 25 years earlier, he had been a promising piano student at the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, one of the most prestigious music schools in China. His teachers had praised his technical precision and emotional depth. His parents, both factory workers, had sacrificed everything to pay for his lessons, believing their son would lift the family out of poverty through his extraordinary talent. Marcus had practiced 8 hours a day, his fingers flying across the keys with a passion that consumed his entire existence. But life has a way of derailing even the most carefully laid plans. When Marcus was 19, his father suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed. The medical bills mounted quickly, and the family could no longer afford the conservatory tuition. Marcus made the painful decision to leave school and find work to support his parents and younger sister. He took a job at a textile factory, his gifted hands now operating machinery instead of creating music. The piano became a memory, a beautiful dream from another lifetime. Years passed and Marcus eventually immigrated to the United States, hoping for better opportunities. He arrived in New York with limited English skills and no credentials that American employers recognized. The only work he could find was cleaning office buildings at night. Eventually, through a connection at a church he attended, he landed the job at Steinway Hall. The irony was not lost on him. Here he was, surrounded by the world's finest pianos and most accomplished musicians, yet forbidden by circumstance to touch the instruments that had once been his whole world. On this particular Thursday night, Marcus worked methodically through his checklist. He vacuumed the red carpet in the aisles, wiped down the armrests, collected trash, and straightened the rows of seats. He worked his way toward the stage, where the magnificent Steinway Model D concert grand piano sat under a soft spotlight. The instrument gleamed like a black jewel, its polished surface reflecting the empty seats before it. Marcus climbed the steps to the stage and began sweeping around the piano's legs. He allowed himself a moment to admire the instrument up close, as he did every night. His fingers tingled with muscle memory, remembering chord progressions and arpeggios from decades ago. He wondered if his hands could still play, if his fingers still possessed the speed and accuracy that had once made his teachers marvel. He had not touched a piano in over 20 years, not since leaving Shanghai. He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching from the wings. A voice startled him from his reverie. "You can touch it if you want." Marcus spun around to find Robert Ashford, the hall's director, standing in the shadows at stage left. Robert was an elegant man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life among artists and intellectuals. He usually left before Marcus arrived for his shift, but tonight he had stayed late finishing paperwork in his office. Marcus stammered in his still-accented English, "No, sir, I just cleaning, I don't touch." Robert stepped into the light, his expression kind but curious. "How long have you worked here, Marcus?" "3 years now." "Yes, sir, 3 years next month. And in all that time, I've never once seen you actually look at the piano the way you just were. You weren't looking at it like a janitor, you were looking at it like a musician." Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment. He had been caught in a private moment and he wasn't sure what to say. "I am sorry, sir, I finished cleaning now." But Robert held up his hand. "Wait, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly. Do you play piano?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus gripped his broom handle tighter, his knuckles whitening. He could maintain the safe distance between his present and his past, but something in Robert's genuine curiosity made him answer truthfully. "Long time ago," Marcus said quietly, "in China, I study at conservatory." "But that was different life." Robert's eyebrows rose with interest. "You studied at a conservatory, which one?" "Shanghai Conservatory of Music." Robert let out a low whistle. "That's one of the finest music schools in Asia. What happened?" Why aren't you performing? Marcus gave a brief, halting explanation about his father's illness, the financial pressures, and the years that followed. As he spoke, he felt the old grief rising in his chest, the mourning for a life that might have been. When he finished, Robert stood silently for a moment, processing what he had heard. Then he walked over to the piano bench and lifted the keyboard cover, revealing the pristine ivory and ebony keys. "Play something for me," Robert said simply. Marcus took a step back, shaking his head vigorously. "No, sir, I cannot, is not allowed, I could lose my job." "I'm the director of this hall," Robert said with a slight smile. "I'm giving you permission, nobody else is here. Just you, me, and this beautiful instrument, play something." Marcus stood frozen on the stage, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain Robert could hear it. The open piano seemed to beckon him, its keys glowing softly under the stage lights. His hands trembled as he stared at the instrument that represented both his greatest love and his deepest loss. 23 years had passed since he last performed. 23 years of silence, of pushing down the musician he had once been in order to survive in a world that demanded practicality over passion. Robert remained standing by the piano, patient and expectant. There was no judgment in his eyes, only genuine curiosity and something that looked like compassion. Marcus realized that this man, who moved in circles of wealth and refinement that Marcus could only observe from the margins, was offering him something precious. A moment of grace. A chance to reclaim, even briefly, the part of himself he thought had died in that Shanghai factory. With legs that felt unsteady, Marcus approached the piano bench. He set his broom carefully against the wall, then wiped his hands on his work pants, suddenly conscious of the calluses and rough skin earned from years of manual labor. These were not the hands of a concert pianist anymore. They were the hands of a working man, scarred and worn. He sat down on the bench and adjusted his position, his body remembering the posture even though his mind doubted everything. He flexed his fingers, stretching them over the keys without pressing down. The familiar span felt both foreign and intimately known, like greeting an old friend after decades apart. "What would you like to hear?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever speaks to you," Robert replied, stepping back to give him space. "Play what your heart remembers." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Without allowing himself time to overthink, he let his fingers descend onto the keys. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2, filled the empty hall. The sound that emerged was tentative at first, his fingers stumbling slightly over passages that had once flowed effortlessly. But as he continued, something miraculous began to happen. His hands remembered what his conscious mind had forgotten. The muscle memory buried deep in his body awakened, and the music began to pour out of him. The Nocturne was a piece he had learned as a teenager, one his mother had loved. She used to sit beside him during practice sessions in their cramped Shanghai apartment, tears streaming down her face as she listened. He had played it at his final recital before leaving the conservatory, knowing even then that it might be his last public performance. Now in this empty concert hall in Manhattan, with only the director as his audience, Marcus poured all of his longing and regret and unspent passion into those notes. As he played, the technical imperfections began to fade. His fingers found their old agility, his touch regained its nuance. The piano responded to him like it had been waiting all these years for him to return. The melody sang out with a bittersweet beauty that seemed to fill every corner of the vast space. Marcus felt tears running down his cheeks, but he didn't stop playing. He couldn't stop. This was a dam breaking, a floodgate opening, a resurrection. When the final notes faded into silence, Marcus sat motionless at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys. He was afraid to open his eyes, afraid that if he looked up the spell would be broken and he would have to return to being just the janitor again. He heard Robert's footsteps approaching, and then the director's voice, thick with emotion. "My God, Marcus, that was extraordinary. Do you understand what you just did? That was a performance worthy of this stage." Marcus finally opened his eyes and turned to look at Robert. The older man's face was flushed, his eyes bright with excitement. "You have a gift," Robert continued, pacing now with agitation. "A genuine, remarkable gift, you can't let it die. You can't spend the rest of your life pushing a mop when you could be making music like that." Marcus shook his head sadly. "It's too late for me, Mr. Ashford. I am 42 years old. I have no credentials in this country, no connections, no money for lessons or competitions. I have rent to pay, bills to manage. Music is luxury I cannot afford. What if I could help you?" Robert said suddenly, the idea clearly forming as he spoke. "What if there was a way to get you back to music?" Marcus stood up from the bench, closing the keyboard cover with gentle finality. "You are very kind, sir. But I know how this world works. I clean this hall. I see the young musicians who come here with their expensive educations and their wealthy families supporting them. That is not my world anymore. Maybe it never was. Robert grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising intensity. Listen to me. In 2 weeks, we're hosting a fundraising gala here at the hall. It's one of our biggest events of the year. Donors, board members, wealthy patrons of the arts. They come expecting dinner, speeches, and a performance by whatever prominent musician we've booked. This year, we have a young pianist from Juilliard scheduled to play. I know, Marcus said, I will clean up after. No, Robert said firmly, I want you to perform. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. That is impossible, you cannot be serious. I am completely serious. I want those people to hear what I just heard. I want them to understand that genius can be found anywhere, in anyone, if we just pay attention. Robert's eyes blazed with a conviction that made Marcus take a step back. Besides, the story itself is powerful. A janitor who studied at Shanghai Conservatory, who gave up his dreams to support his family, who hasn't touched a piano in over 2 decades, performing at one of New York's most prestigious venues. The press will love it. Our donors will be moved. And you, Marcus, you deserve to stand in the spotlight instead of cleaning up after it. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. The idea was absurd, terrifying, impossible. Mr. Ashford, please. I cannot do this. I am not prepared. I would humiliate myself and you. That performance you just heard, it was one piece, played with many mistakes after not practicing for 20 years. You cannot put me on stage in front of important people. They will laugh. They won't laugh, Robert said with absolute certainty. Trust me on this. I've been in the classical music world for 40 years. I know talent when I hear it. What you just played wasn't technically perfect, no, but it had something that many technically perfect performances lack. It had soul. It had truth. It had the sound of a man playing like his life depends on it, because in a way it does. Marcus sank back onto the piano bench, overwhelmed. Part of him wanted to run from the hall and never return. But another part, the part that had just felt alive for the first time in decades, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the chance he had stopped allowing himself to dream about. I would need to practice, he said slowly, barely believing he was considering this. Every night after my shift, I would need time with the piano. You'll have it, Robert said immediately, full access. And I'll arrange for you to work with one of our piano coaches, someone who can help you prepare. We'll keep this quiet until the gala. Let it be a surprise. Marcus looked down at his hands, these rough working hands that had just coaxed beauty from ivory and ebony keys. He thought about his mother, who had passed away 5 years ago without ever hearing him play again. He thought about his father, still alive in a nursing home in Queens, who sometimes forgot his son's name but still remembered the music. He thought about all the years of silence and the unbearable weight of unfulfilled potential. Okay, he whispered, I will try. Robert's face broke into a wide smile. You'll do more than try, Marcus, you're going to astonish them. The next 2 weeks became a blur of exhaustion and exhilaration for Marcus. He maintained his regular janitorial duties, arriving at the hall each evening at 9 o'clock. But now, after completing his cleaning rounds by midnight, instead of going home, he would spend 4 hours at the piano, practicing until his fingers ached and his eyes burned with fatigue. He would stumble back to his small apartment in Queens just as the sun was rising, catch 3 hours of sleep, then wake to begin the cycle again. Robert had been true to his word, arranging for Marcus to work with Alina Rostova, a retired concert pianist who now taught at the Manhattan School of Music. Alina was a formidable woman in her 70s, originally from Moscow, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. When Robert first introduced them, Marcus had felt intimidated by her reputation and her exacting standards. Their first session had been humbling. Alina listened to him play the Chopin Nocturne, her face impassive. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. You have natural musicality, she said in her Russian-accented English. This cannot be taught, you either have it or you don't, and you have it, but your technique has deteriorated significantly, your finger independence is poor. Your pedaling is imprecise. Your posture creates tension that limits your power and speed. Marcus had nodded, accepting the criticism. He had expected nothing less. However, Alina continued, and her stern expression softened slightly, there is something in your playing that moves me. You understand the emotion behind the notes. So we will work. We will work very hard. You have given me only 2 weeks to prepare you for a performance that should take months of preparation. This is insane, but Robert tells me your story, and I think maybe insane is what we need sometimes. Under Alina's demanding instruction, Marcus began rebuilding his technique. She had him practice scales and arpeggios until his hands cramped. She corrected his posture dozens of times each session, tapping his shoulders to release tension, adjusting the angle of his wrists. She made him play passages in different rhythms to develop evenness and control. It was grueling work made harder by the fact that his body was no longer young and resilient. But Marcus attacked the challenge with a determination that surprised even himself. This opportunity felt like a gift from the universe, a second chance he had never imagined possible. He couldn't waste it. Between practice sessions, he found himself thinking about music constantly. Melodies from his youth floated through his mind as he mopped floors and emptied trash bins. His fingers would unconsciously work through fingerings while he wrote the subway. For the gala performance, Alina helped him choose his repertoire carefully. The Chopin Nocturne would open, as it was the piece he knew best and could play with genuine feeling. Then they selected a Beethoven sonata movement, the second movement of the Pathétique, which had a singing melody that would showcase his lyrical touch. Finally, for a dramatic conclusion, they chose the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 by Liszt, a showy piece that would demonstrate technical brilliance if he could pull it off. The list was a gamble. It was fiendishly difficult, requiring speed, power, and precision that Marcus hadn't commanded in over 2 decades. But Alina insisted that he needed something spectacular to finish with, something that would leave the audience breathless. "If you are going to do this, do it completely," she told him. "Don't play it safe, show them everything you have." As the days passed, Marcus began to notice his playing improving. His fingers regained their flexibility and strength. Passages that had seemed impossible in the first week started to feel manageable. The muscle memory returned more fully each day, as though his hands were remembering not just the notes but the joy of making music. But it wasn't just the technical aspects that improved. Something deeper was shifting inside Marcus. For years, he had moved through the world as a diminished version of himself, accepting his invisibility as the price of survival. Now, spending hours each night immersed in music, he felt himself expanding back into the person he had once been. The pianist in him, dormant for so long, was awakening. Still, the terror remained. Late at night, alone at the piano, Marcus would sometimes freeze with anxiety about the upcoming performance. What if he failed? What if he forgot the notes? What if his hands seized up from nervousness? What if the audience saw him as nothing more than a janitor with delusions of grandeur? Robert checked on him regularly, always encouraging, always believing. "You're ready for this," he would say. "I can hear the difference every time I listen to you practice." 3 days before the gala, Alina declared that they had done all they could. "Now you must rest," she instructed. "No more 12-hour days, sleep, eat properly. Let your body recover, the music is in you now, trust it." Marcus tried to follow her advice, but sleep was elusive. He lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, imagining himself on that stage. He had told almost no one about the performance. His sister in California knew, and she had cried with joy over the phone. A few close friends from his church knew. But he had deliberately kept the news from spreading, partly from superstition and partly from fear that if too many people knew, the pressure would become unbearable. The day of the gala arrived. Marcus came to Steinway Hall that morning, not as a janitor but as a performer. The building bustled with activity as staff prepared for the evening's event. Caterers set up tables in the grand foyer. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces. Sound technicians tested equipment. Marcus felt out of place in this daytime version of the hall, surrounded by purposeful activity that had nothing to do with cleaning. Robert found him standing nervously in the wings, staring out at the stage. "How are you feeling?" the director asked. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "I keep thinking I should run away." Robert laughed gently. "Every great performer feels that way before going on stage. The fear means you care, it means it matters." That evening, Marcus arrived 2 hours before the performance, dressed in a tuxedo that Robert had arranged to be tailored for him. He barely recognized himself in the mirror. The elegant clothing transformed him, but it also felt like a costume, like he was playing a role that didn't truly belong to him. In the green room, he tried to warm up his fingers, but they felt stiff and uncooperative. His heart raced. His palms sweated. He could hear the guests arriving, the murmur of conversation and laughter filtering backstage. These were New York's cultural elite, people who attended concerts at Carnegie Hall and the Met, people whose standards were impossibly high. Alina appeared in the doorway. She walked over to him and placed both hands on his shoulders, looking directly into his eyes. "Marcus Chen," she said firmly, "you are about to walk onto that stage. When you do, you must forget everything except the music. Forget the audience, forget your fear. Forget that you are a janitor, an immigrant, a man who lost his dream. Remember only that you are a musician and you have a story to tell through your playing. You have earned this moment, now go and claim it." At 8:30 that evening, after the dinner service had concluded and the guests had settled into their seats with glasses of wine and coffee, Robert Ashford walked onto the stage to introduce the evening's performance. Marcus stood in the wings, his heart hammering against his ribs so violently he thought he might collapse. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see the audience, nearly 500 people in evening gowns and tuxedos, their faces turned expectantly toward the stage. Robert's voice carried clearly through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I have a very special performance to share with you. We had originally scheduled a young pianist from Juilliard, but I've made a last-minute change to our program. What I'm about to tell you is a true story." Marcus closed his eyes, listening as Robert recounted his history. The studying at Shanghai Conservatory, the family crisis that ended his musical education, the years of factory work in China and custodial jobs in America, the night 2 weeks ago when Robert had discovered him staring at the piano with longing. "For 3 years," Robert continued, "this man has cleaned this concert hall. He has emptied your trash, polished these floors, and straightened these seats. He has been invisible to most of us, just another service worker we pass without really seeing. But inside him has lived a musician of remarkable talent, silent all these years. Tonight, Marcus Chen will be silent no more. Tonight, he steps out of the shadows and into the light." The audience responded with surprised murmurs and a smattering of uncertain applause. Marcus heard the skepticism in their reaction. They had come expecting a polished conservatory student, not a middle-aged janitor with a sentimental backstory. Robert gestured toward the wings. "Please welcome Marcus Chen." This was the moment. Marcus forced his legs to move, walking out onto the stage with as much dignity as he could muster. The applause was polite but reserved. He could feel their doubt, their lowered expectations. Some people probably thought this was a publicity stunt, a feel-good story that would result in an amateurish performance they would have to endure graciously. Marcus sat at the piano bench and adjusted his position just as Alina had taught him. He looked out. Adjusted his position just as Alina had taught him. He looked out at the sea of faces and felt a wave of panic. These people were waiting for him to fail. They were already composing the patronizing compliments they would offer afterward. Poor man, very brave of him to try. Quite touching really, even if the playing was rough. Then he remembered Alina's words, "Forget the audience, forget the fear, remember only the music." Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play the Chopin Nocturne. The opening notes floated into the hall, delicate and tender. He had played this piece hundreds of times over the past 2 weeks, but now, in this moment, it felt different. Each note carried the weight of everything he had lost and everything he had endured. The melody spoke of his mother's tears, his father's sacrifice, the dreams he had buried in order to survive. As he played, something remarkable happened. The skepticism in the room began to dissolve. The audience, prepared to indulge a heartwarming story with mediocre execution, found themselves confronted with something entirely unexpected. This was not amateur playing. This was artistry. Marcus felt the shift. He felt the audience leaning forward in their seats, their attention sharpening. The doubt in the room transformed into surprise, then into something deeper. They were listening now, truly listening. When the nocturne ended, there was a moment of stunned silence before the applause began. It was different from the polite reception when he had walked on stage. This was genuine appreciation, even astonishment. Marcus didn't pause to acknowledge it. He moved immediately into the Beethoven, the Pathétique's second movement. This piece required a different touch, more introspective and philosophical. His fingers sang the melody, while his left hand provided a steady, heartbeat-like accompaniment. He thought about all the nights he had spent alone in this hall after everyone had gone home, surrounded by music he could only listen to, never make. He thought about the years of silence, and how that silence had given this moment its profound meaning. The Beethoven drew even deeper into the emotional core of the audience. Some people were visibly moved, dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. This wasn't just skillful playing. This was a man bearing his soul through music, sharing his pain and his hope and his unbreakable love for an art form that had sustained him even in its absence. Then came the moment Marcus had most feared and most anticipated. The Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody, the flashy showpiece that would require everything he had. He took a breath and launched into the opening, his fingers attacking the keys with power and precision. The Rhapsody was a technical gauntlet, demanding rapid octaves, wild leaps across the keyboard, and thunderous chords. Marcus had worried that his hands, conditioned by years of manual labor rather than concert preparation, would fail him. But something extraordinary occurred. All the physical strength he had built pushing mops and lifting trash bags now served him. His hands were strong, his fingers powerful. The calluses that had embarrassed him actually helped him dig into the keys with force and certainty. He played with abandon, with joy, with the kind of fearless commitment that only comes from someone who has nothing to lose and everything to prove. The music blazed through the hall, Marcus's hands flying across the keyboard in a blur of motion. The famous showpiece passages, the ones designed to make audiences gasp, rang out with brilliant clarity. The audience was transfixed. This was not supposed to be possible. A janitor who hadn't played seriously in over 20 years should not be capable of this level of performance. Yet here it was, undeniable and magnificent. As Marcus drove toward the Rhapsody's explosive conclusion, he felt completely alive. Every cell in his body was engaged, every faculty focused on this single purpose. The final chords crashed out like thunder, and Marcus's hands came down on the last notes with triumphant force. For a heartbeat silence, then the audience erupted. People leaped to their feet, applauding wildly, cheering, some openly weeping. The ovation went on, a wave of sound that washed over Marcus as he sat at the piano, almost unable to process what had just happened. He stood and bowed, tears streaming down his face. He looked out at these people who had been strangers, who had doubted him, and saw them transformed by shared experience of beauty and human resilience. Robert was standing in the wings, applauding with his hands above his head, his face radiant with vindication and pride. The standing ovation continued for 5 full minutes. People were shouting bravo and refusing to sit down. Marcus bowed again and again, overwhelmed by the response. In the days that followed, Marcus's performance became a viral sensation. Someone had recorded it on their phone, and the video spread across social media with stunning speed. News outlets picked up the story. Marcus was interviewed on morning television shows. The New York Times ran a feature article. Suddenly, the invisible janitor was being seen by millions. But more importantly, Marcus's life changed in concrete ways. Robert worked with the board of Steinway Hall to create a new position for him as artist-in-residence, allowing him to teach piano to underserved students while continuing to develop his own artistry. Belina took him on as a private student, refusing to accept payment. Several concert venues offered him performance opportunities. Marcus continued to live modestly in his Queens apartment, but now he spent his days making music instead of cleaning up after it. He established a scholarship fund for talented students who couldn't afford music education, determined that others would not have to abandon their dreams as he once had. When asked in interviews about that night at Steinway Hall, Marcus always said the same thing. He had not astonished anyone with a piano performance like no other. He had simply been given the chance to share what had always lived inside him. The astonishing part was not the playing itself, but the fact that we live in a world where talent and passion can hide in plain sight, waiting decades for a single moment of recognition. His story became a reminder that human potential cannot be judged by job titles or social status, that genius and beauty can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that it is never too late to reclaim the dreams we thought we had lost forever. Like, share, and subscribe, don't miss it.